dude. Nah.
Okay, so this is a bit of an unusual one. I'm the guest of my own podcast because I've got a book coming out in December. I don't actually have a date yet. I would hate to give you a date and then it wouldn't hit that date. It's with the printers as we speak right now. The book is called...
You don't want to be one of those,
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
The book's called...
It's coming out
FauxVille.
December 17th and it comes out fucking January 8th.
Yeah, it comes out inauguration day. No, it was last year. But comes out during the next riots. But yeah, so I wrote this book called FauxVille. It's a French title, means fake city. I pronounce it FauxVille, but you started saying FauxVille, and I was like, the way you say it sounds better, so I'll start saying it the way you say it now. I mean, I'm not joking, man. This shit it would be 5 years in February since I wrote it. So I got it out just before the 5-year mark. That's like half my 20s. Boom.
Would you reckon that's a normal time frame for a beginner novel? It's got to be in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this last night. I was saying about how, there's certain ways that you can go about writing anything. This goes to any writers out there. And I kind of did it backwards in the sense that I kind of came up with this plot, this structure, and then kind of try to fill in the rest. So basically, to sum this up for you, right, we've got two parts of the brain. One part is the creative part where you come up with all the ideas. And then the other part is like the editor, the problem solver part of your brain, the logical side, the rational part of your brain. And I was for years, I was like doing both at the same time. This is before I was even writing this book, like when we're like 20 years old. And that is the worst thing that you can ever do, because our ego, our pride is like, oh, I want to fix it as I go along. Never. If there's any writers watching this, don't ever do that. Just swallow your pride and just let the first draft be trash, because it's going to be trash regardless. I forget which, it might have been Oscar Wilde that said this. No, I think it was Yeats. I think Yeats said this. The first draft of anything is shit. That's basically what he said.
100%.
And so that's what, so it happens when it happens. You know what I mean? I'd get all these moments of writer's block and I'd sit on it for like 2 months, 3 months and go do something else. It would be work related or getting high or hanging out with mates. But anyway, I'll give you the blurb. So David Miller is an amnesiac war veteran struggling to adjust to 2049's Port City. That's where he's living. And he starts to be, as he's putting the pieces back together again of his fractured past, his memory and all that, an old friend from the war comes back and warns him that this war's not over and there's something inside his head, deep inside his head, that the enemy are after. And that sort of kind of kicks it off. It's a science fiction, but it's more in line with a psychological thriller, dystopian fiction.
I tell you what, when I read it the first time, because I need to read it through again the second time, fully edited and stuff. But first time I read it, obviously I get sci-fi vibes, because obviously that's big inspiration. But when I was reading that, I got a really I wouldn't say noir, because it's not, like a thriller, mysterious. You like when you're reading it, you're gonna question a lot of things.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Before the end, you're gonna know a lot of the answers to those questions. But thriller, sci-fi, thriller, I'd say it's more of a thriller in my eyes. Sci-fi, you get the sci-fi from the
Well, funny enough, I'm not really, I love reading science fiction, but I'm not big on science fiction now that I'm older. I mean, you and I both went through the same thing when we were in our late teens, early 20s. We were on the Philip K. Dick bandwagon, the Richard Heinlein, Alfred Bester, you name it, we were all over it. But as I've gotten older,
before we go balls deep into something we love. That's the thing.
Yeah,
we just
one-track minded. Yeah. We just go crazy for it. But as I've gotten older, I've just focused more on characters rather than just concepts. So there's very little sci-fi in it other than stuff that's relevant to the plot. Like you read a science fiction book and people might describe holograms, or they might just describe new technologies that don't exist in present world, whereas I kind of refrain from that. I just think it's more focused on character rather than description. But I mean,
is that in the subconscious thing for like the future? Say that the particular thing you described or explained or try to predict didn't come true, it just doesn't age well, does it?
Yeah, I mean, you see that with a lot of things. I mean, I'll tell you a little bit of a segue. Funny enough, right? So I've been reading the book The Forever War by Joe Holdman, I think his name was. So he was a Vietnam veteran, and he wrote I think it was 1974. This book got published, The Forever War, and it's a science fiction, but it has a lot of his experiences in the Vietnam War is in there. And because of this war they're fighting in interstellar space, because of Einstein's general relativity, light speed and all that, you age slower than the rest of the world around you, or the rest of the universe. So every time he's coming back, 15, 20, 100 years has passed on Earth, and he's still in his mid-20s. His parents are dead. Everybody, he doesn't know anyone anymore. And one of the funny things that he predicted that he didn't predict right, well, he kind of got this right, but the way it hasn't aged well. It would come across as kind of homophobic. But he predicted when he first comes back from war, it's the year 2023, I think, right? And everybody's gay. Everybody's become, like, 1/3 of the whole population has become homosexual. And the character is completely uncomfortable. Even his mum's a lesbian by this point. And the reason why is because the population's reached like 9 billion. So is it the UN? They call it the UN. Well, it's like the UN in our world, but it's like its own version of the UN. Basically, it's like the overseer of the whole world, of all of its affairs and the war and everything. And even his mum's, they're trying to control the population. So everyone's becoming gay. And this character, his name's William Mandela. He just can't comprehend it. And you're reading it now and you're like, oh, that's not aged well. The way he sort of...
But think about it right for a second, and how you've explained that. Everything is going gay. Everything is turning gay.
Well, yeah, everything's becoming more... But this was 1974 when this was published. So, I mean, even in the 80s, the 90s, I mean, people who were gay were marginalized, and
true,
people were bigoted against them. Whereas now it's changed. It's like, so you're reading it now, you're like, whew. There's an Agatha Christie novel out there whose name I will not repeat, but it's got an interesting name.
It's got an interesting title if you can find it.
Now it's called And Then There Were None. But if you can go on Google and look up the original Agatha Christie And Then There Were None original title, you're in for a little treat. That shit didn't age too well either. But yeah, so anyway, to get to the point of the question that you were saying, yeah, it's not... I'm just not big on description. I'm more focused on character, and I don't like to go off on tangents about what's around them, the holograms or virtual reality, this, that, and the other. I just keep it to the point, because it's like, it's not natural to me. When I first started writing, I was inspired heavily by Stephen King. I'm reading Stephen King, I'm like, wow, I really like his style. But it didn't come natural to me. And it wasn't until I started reading Elmore Leonard and Chuck Palahniuk. They're defined as minimalist writers. They focus on the dialogue, and they just focus on the story, very little description at all. And that's how I write. You know what I mean? Because it's not about, it's up to you. There is no right or wrong on how you articulate yourself when writing, but you got to do what's natural to you. And what was I going to say? I've gone completely blank. Oh yeah, it's not about long fancy sentences. It's use the most effective word possible to try and sum something up in one word rather than a sentence. Keep it tight, keep it clean. That's all.
Do you write the way you read? Do you write do you write the way that you read something? So is that how you would write something? Have I said that right? Have I said that like
I know what you're trying to say. No, I know what you're trying to say. Not necessarily. Like I'm pretty chill when it comes to reading. Like, I struggle with fantasy novels, especially if it's like it doesn't even have to be a fantasy novel, but the types. It's just this massive world building, and that's not for me. When I try and do world building, I'll do it through very little subtle hints. In the book FauxVille, the world starts to be slowly introduced around chapter 3. David kind of uses his incentive to go to the library and read about the actual war he was in, the Atlantic War, which is a war between the Anarcho-Capitalists and the Democratic Socialists of Deutschland. So that's kind of explained very briefly in the library articles, just to kind of sum up what was going on, the war he was in. And well, I want to make sure I don't go down too many tangents so quickly, but
Make sure you don't spoil anything either.
I don't want to spoil anything either, yeah. But it gives you an idea of what the war was like, but I breezed through it very, very quickly without getting into the ins and outs of it. It's like, right, you get the gist of it, right? There you go. Let's move on.
Because you're there. You know what I mean? When I'm reading it, you're there. You don't need to describe the world around you when you're there. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. You know, I explained some of the logistics of it all, and, you know, so that way the reader can paint in the mind, oh, right, so these are the bad guys and these are the good guys, roughly, or this is the side he's on versus the side against him. And I'll go in later on, I'll go in more depth about, you know, the inspirations behind those particular, the war itself. But you know, to understand as well when it comes to writing, you've got to be true to your characters. Now, some people say that George R.R. Martin, I think, is an example. He says that the writer, the characters speak to him, and that doesn't happen with me. That's just never how it's been with me. You know, I'm kind of like a fly on the wall. If I get stoned and start thinking about a situation,
we're the same that way. I see my characters speaking. They don't speak to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. You see them having a conversation, kind of like Pulp Fiction. You know what I mean? You see Jules and Vincent in the car talking about the different cultural differences between America and Europe. They use McDonald's, this, that, and the other. So that's how I kind of see it, like a fly on the wall. And it's like, oh, what is this conversation? I mean, I've mentioned this before in a previous podcast, but Stephen King did a memoir on writing. This is back in like the year 2000. And he gives an example of Elmore Leonard's writing style, and he gives you an idea of how to write good dialogue. And he takes a little passage from the I don't know what year it came out, but it was the novel Be Cool. It's a sequel to Get Shorty. Get Shorty is a great book, by the way, but Be Cool is the sequel. And it got made into a film with John Travolta playing Chili Palmer. And he takes this little bit of dialogue, and I can't remember it, how the dialogue goes, but Stephen King says, you know, if you sat at a restaurant and you overheard that conversation, wouldn't you want to keep listening? And I was like, that's how you write good dialogue. That's how it's meant to be. It's meant to intrigue people. You don't want it to be stilted and convoluted and clunky. It's an art form. It takes practice, and it took me years to get good at it, because that's my priority, is good dialogue. So
it's another unwritten rule of the podcast as well, isn't it?
With the podcast, the art of good conversation. You know, because Chuck Palahniuk says it. You know, good stories, because we're very anecdotal with our stories and our humor. Good stories don't leave people speechless. It leaves them competing. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And we're always bouncing off each guest and shit. Exactly. You know, so
it's going to tell them to shut the fuck up 1 second. There we go. Sorted.
Like, if you forgot to mute the mic, all you heard was shut the fuck.
Nah, they're cool. Cool.
Cool.
But yeah, you know what I mean? It's like good conversation. Good stories don't leave people speechless. It leaves them competing, because it's something that I've developed only in the last few years, really, because I think it's about confidence and self-esteem, to really have the courage to be in amongst a group of people and be like, oh, I'm gonna have the courage to tell this story, not fuck it up, not stutter. It doesn't even have to be a joke. It's just, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like one-liners and this, that, and the other, but my own humor is kind of long form, and it's usually self-deprecating, so it's at my own expense, and I don't mind. I can laugh at myself. We grew up in Corby, where you kind of had to have a thick skin.
Yeah, man, you gotta fucking be able to take it.
Yeah. And 100%. As I got older and started to really kind of be more comfortable in my own skin, you know, because, well, I'll go more in depth with this anyway as we go along, because part of me growing up in my 20s is very crucial to the book itself, the journey. But yeah, dialogue's important to me. I love characters telling stories, you know, and there's plenty of it in FauxVille, and it's natural because it's based on conversations I've either had myself with yourself or other friends or family, or it's based on conversations I've ever heard, or someone that's told me something. I'm thinking, that's how you make characters real. Have them tell the story.
It's based off experience, isn't it? It's like, imagine what was his name? Martin Scorsese directing a Steven Spielberg film. You couldn't, because Martin Scorsese has his films. You know what I mean?
They have their own voice.
Steven Spielberg. I mean, obviously Steven Spielberg hasn't gone flying around the jungle with a whip as an archaeologist, but that's his vision. You know what I mean? It's not Martin Scorsese. Yeah, but do you know what I mean? It's
a bit of a segue, but this actually happened not with Scorsese, but with Spielberg. So you're familiar with the 2001 movie Artificial Intelligence with Haley Joel Osment? Yeah. That was meant to be Stanley Kubrick that made that movie, but really? He died in '99. just
as a sequel to Space Odyssey, or just
its own
standalone?
film. No, it's based on a
Yeah.
short story by some guy called Summer Toys Last All Year or something like that, or Toys Last All. I can't remember what the name of the short story, but Stanley Kubrick wanted to make this, and he'd be on the phone because him and Steven Spielberg were very, very close, and they'd be talking about this film he had in mind, but he didn't want it. He was convinced, Kubrick was convinced, that no human actor, young actor, child actor, could portray David the robot. So they tried to use prosthetics, but because it was the 90s, they just couldn't make it work. So he just kind of waited for the technology. But then sadly, he passed away in 99, just as Eyes Wide Shut, his last movie, came out. So Stanley Kubrick said, Steven Spielberg said, well, I'm going to make it then. And that's what he did. And I think it's a fantastic film.
I need to go rewatch it, man, because I haven't watched that since I was a youngling. But
And people complain about the movie saying it's quite inconsistent in its tone, because obviously there's some bits that are Stanley Kubrick inspired and there's bits that are Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
Spielberg has gone on record saying that the bits of the film that people think that I did were actually were Stanley Kubrick, and the bits that they think were his because he's more darker in tone, whereas Spielberg was more family friendly for the most part.
Yeah.
But it was actually the other way around.
That's crazy. I need to watch that. Is it worth watching? It's
a great film. It's long, but as an adult, you really kind of think, wow, it's a bit formulaic in certain parts, but you got to bear in mind, it's the best we would have gotten because Kubrick died and Steven Spielberg tried his best to make his mate's movie, but so when it comes to characters, like I already mentioned about dialogue being an important thing, I have this thing, like I call it a writer's instinct, and I'm sure you've got it, and I'm sure there's plenty of other people, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be writer's instinct, but there's some form of gut instinct that we have as creative people where we just kind of know that something's wrong, and it doesn't even have to be within a creative endeavor. It can be walking down the street and you get that gut instinct, like I need to fucking leave, it's our second brain essentially. But I'll be writing dialogue with this book and immediately my gut instinct would be like, this is shite, stop right now, cross this out. And I would, and because it just wasn't natural to the character.
Yeah.
And when it comes to characters, I'm going to tell you the story about, so the main character is named David Miller, war veteran. And I'll take you way back to the beginning. So it was 2014. I was working at Haven Holiday Park as a sports coach. And initially I was thrilled when I got the job. Was this
the first time on your own when you nearly flooded the village, or?
No, that was a year later, but I'll tell you about that too as well. So.
Oh, okay. I'm just making sure. I'm making sure the timeline.
Yeah, I'm not very good at speaking in linear, but I'll do my best on this part. So it's 2014. I'm 22 years of age. And I mean, I've been wanting to write since I was young. So I've always been trying. I wasn't very good for a long, long time, but the ambition was always there from a young age, as it was with you. Every time we're in English and they said, all right, write a story, it could be whatever you want. That was always my favorite part of English, or literacy as they called it back then. And do you know what?
All of English was my favorite. I think we've some certain times we fucked around.
English and drama, it was like a creative outlet. We took a step back from the academics and we thought, oh, you know what? I'm just free to be who let my imagination
in drama,
run wild.
I didn't give a shit if I made a fool of myself or anything. I just wanted to fucking just be free. Do you know what I mean? And act.
That's it. So we've always had that. We've always had that in our heart from a young age. That's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah. And I wrote a short story in 2006. And it got entered by my English teacher, and it got entered into the Young Writers Award, and I won that award. And I'm not going to blow smoke up my own ass. I'm sure there's 8 other kids in Lodge Park that also got published in that. So, you know what I mean? And it wasn't that great of a short story, I'm being honest. I've read it recently. But, it was dope because, again, I'll tell you the story. It was 250 words. So at that time, the Xbox 360 had just come out, and one of the launch titles was a game called Perfect Dark Zero. And in Perfect Dark Zero online, there is a game mode called Infection. So you've played this last year when we were during lockdown. We did this, and in Infection, say there's 30 people in the map. 4 of those people will be infected. There'll be a skeleton, and you can kill them, but they'll just keep coming back. And eventually, the game is over when everybody in the map is infected. Pretty good enough game for its time. And I wrote a short story based on the experiences of being the last person alive in the map, just trying to run out the timer. And the story was just called Infection. there's a guy inside like a cupboard, like in a subway, and there's dead bodies all over the floor, and there's these monsters on the other side just trying to get in, trying to boot the door down. And right next to him is like this corpse with a gun in its hand, and he picks up the gun, like a revolver, I think it was, and it's only got one bullet. And throughout the whole 250 word story is just his own decision making, like, what do I do? What do I do? You know? And then the door breaks down, and then it just ends with bang. You don't know whether he shot them or shot himself. And that, you know, pretty good for a 14-year-old kid, you know what I mean? Like I use my experiences, that adrenaline rush I got playing Infection, to write that
concepts there. I never read it, but like that's a fucking.
You read it.
Your storytelling like brains there. Do you know what I mean?
That was the origin.
And it would have got fucking entered into a fucking thing if it wasn't that good.
Yeah, I mean,
and for your age, you know what I mean? It's for your age.
Yeah.
No one's gonna be fucking Stephen King when they're 12, 13.
Exactly.
I mean?
It wasn't exactly fucking D.H. Lawrence. It was very sloppy. But you know what? But I still pat myself. You know, I still think, well done for. I like the you know, how I managed to connect the dots based on something real to tell a story, right? So that was the beginning. So I'm 22 years of age and I'm working at Haven, a holiday park called Weymouth Bay. And at first I was over the moon when I first got this job, because before that I was on my ass working as a temp. So it was just amazing to have full-time work. But very, very quickly I realized these sorts of vacation parks, holiday parks, are a pain in the ass. You basically, like, slaves are a strong word, but you just basically, you're just being thrown in there 50, 60 hours a week, maybe one day a week off if you're lucky. And I'm teaching archery, I'm teaching rifle shooting, I'm teaching this, that, and the other. And I'm 6 weeks into the job. Weather's getting nice. And I just started walking around, and I look around at these holiday parks and I notice you've got all these mobile homes and everything's looking pristine and utopian. It's like meant to be like a slice of paradise, if you will, you know, because the whole concept is that most people will be lucky, working class people, that is, will be lucky enough to have one holiday a year. So Haven's trying to sell people an experience, right? And I just started I had this epiphany where I'm like, this isn't real. This is all bullshit. Like, there's a French philosopher named Jean Baudrillard, and he talks about postmodernism. He talks about simulacrum and simulation. He talks about how, you know, it's really convoluted and complex, but he basically talks about how
Shia
LaBeouf. He's essentially talking about how a simulacra is when something is imitating something that's actually real, and is imitating a real, and it's been given back to you to say, oh, this is real. And it's like, no, that's an imitation. That's not that's not reality. And that's what I saw, because these groundskeepers are cutting the grass perfectly, and all the slabs are laid perfectly, and it's this whole, there's just selling a dream, but it's not a real dream. It's and the other. And I came up with this idea.
I get you.
And I just, at the time, I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here. I mean, I managed to do the whole season, but I just wanted to run away. And that's when I came up with the idea, not fully formed, but I came up with the idea of someone just trying to get out of a fake world, trying to get out of this perfect presentation, a bit like the Truman Show, a bit like the Matrix. And I spent about a month on it, and it was about 7,000 words long. So it was quite a long short story. You know, we're talking about a good 20 pages. And it was just nice. It was just nice to write this story. And this short story introduced the characters of David, Hackby, Dr. Murray, Spike. You know, I mean, it introduced the characters that would be essential for the actual novel itself. But for the most part, the plot was a bit half-baked. But that was the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Not much characterization. But it wasn't until 2017 that I left a well-paid job. I was working for New Look head office. So I was working as a French-speaking IT analyst, and I did it for about 10 months. And
we are not sponsored by New Look.
We are not sponsored by New Look. Fuck New Look. And this job, I'm just not built for office jobs. I'm a very proactive person, very creative. I need to be having conversations with people. I need to be like engaging in stuff that's not robotic, and you know what I mean? And one day I'm about 9 months into the job, and I'm working a Saturday, and I look over to the project analyst department, and I see that there's these celebration cards. One of them says 15 years, happy 15 years. One of them said happy 20 years. And the one next to that said happy 25 years. That's someone that's, I was 24 at the time. Someone had been working for the company longer than I'd been alive. I'd been there for like 9, 10 months. I thought, I have to get out of here. I have to go. I went on this blog called Couch Surf. I think it was called couchsurf.com.
All right. What's that, like a...
It's like spare
rooms.
Yeah,
spare
like,
rooms. Yeah.
Basically just to sleep on someone's couch. So I put the message out there and I thought, I'm going to go to Bordeaux. Let's go to Bordeaux. And I put it out there.
You can do it. You can what? So you could put USA in and you could couch surfed in USA.
Yeah.
I'd fucking do it now. I'm not doing it now, but like, that's a fucking...
Cost a fortune to get there, but I thought, I've been to France before, so I was like, let's try it. So I put it out there, and this guy called Lionel gets back to me. Lionel Launier. He's a character in the book. And he's like, yeah, I got a place you can stay, €200 a month. I was like, €200 a month? That's like 180 quid. That's amazing. I had my notice in.
Fucking dope.
Yeah, I had my notice in. A month later, I'm in Bordeaux. All right. And bearing in mind, the 10 months I was working at New Look, I was creatively bankrupt. I had no ambition to want to write anything. I was barely reading. I just had nothing. I knew it was bad for my soul. So I bought a notepad on the off chance, because in my head, I'd already written a couple of 2 short stories based on what would be FauxVille that explored some of the characters and some of the concepts, but I wanted to make it into a novel. But I couldn't get into the head of David Miller, the amnesiac war veteran, because I thought about my dad, because my dad's a veteran and he's was part of Veterans for Peace. And one thing I found fascinating about him and the other veterans is that they tell a lot of anecdotal stories like we do. They mask their pain with humor. And I found that fascinating. So do anything but talk about their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I had to be true to the characters in this book. But I couldn't I couldn't make the character work because I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a veteran. But I had my little J.K. Rowling moment, my Stephen King moment, whatever moment you want to call it. The light bulb went off when finally I'm walking through San Michel to go to the gym. And I'm the only white face in this part of town, and no one bothered me. It was great. And I'm listening to the Doors. People are strange. And something occurred to me. I thought, well, I might not be a soldier. I might not be a veteran, but I'm the next best thing. I'm a foreigner. And that was it. I bought a bottle of red wine, got my notepad, got my pen, and just started scribbling away. And that was when the story began in February of 2017. 4 months later, I had a first draft, about 33,000 words, which is only like, 110 pages. And
the beginning's got to start somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah. And I tell you what, I was so chuffed with myself.
By any chance, was the name of that red wine Cathedral District?
Oh, Red Cathedral. No. Right. So the wine I was drinking over there was from a region just outside of Bordeaux called Saint-Emilion. It's a beautiful wine. So I gave it a fictional name, just called it Red Cathedral, because I think in Saint-Emilion they have a...
Is that what the Cathedral District in the book? That's why I brought it up, because I actually wrote that down.
Yeah, Cathedral. It's just kind of a throwaway line, but yeah. Because it took me 4 months to write the first draft, but it took me 3 years to write the second and final draft. A lot changed.
But that's good, because you initially had the story there to go off.
Exactly. There was no any mention of the war in the first draft. I didn't really elaborate on it at all. And then Stephen King says in his memoir, it's always good to have like 2 months break after your first draft. Just go do something else and then come back to it. So you've got a different mindset going into it. So that's what I'd done. But I'd come back to the UK and I was working back at Haven, funny enough, but now I'm 25 years old. So I've got a bit of a different attitude, easier to handle this job this time around. And minimum wage was better for 25-year-olds back then. Whereas before, when you're 21, you're getting like fucking £6 an hour.
Oh, mate, it's atrocious. You don't realize it.
Yeah. So
no one tells you. Everyone keeps a secret. It's like,
so
tell them until they're 25.
It wasn't long till once I turned 24, 25, the Conservative Party introduced the national working wage, whatever it's called, not minimum wage, working wage, which is like, now it's £9.50, or it's going to be £9.50. But anyway, so I'm spending 2 months just hanging out with some of the lifeguards, getting high. They introduced me to a lot of things I'd missed out while I'd been away from England. Black Mirror season 3 had just come out. Rick and Morty season 3 had just come out. And so I started on Black Mirror because I was a bit late to the party. And in season 3, there's an episode called Playtest where there's this American backpacker just sort of running away from his mother or something like that. I don't know I can't really remember that well, but he ends up meeting up kind of like me with Lionel. Like he just kind of finds a place to stay and he meets up with this girl and she has a book, something called The Singularity. And I was like, what is that? And she describes it about as when machines become more intelligent than humans. And instantly I'm like, I need to get that book. That particular book, I don't think exists. I think that was just used for the TV show, but I found a book similar to it by a man named Ray Kurzweil. And he wrote a book called The Singularity is Near in 2005. And that became one of the most important pieces of resources necessary for me to write the second and final draft of the novel, which is heavily used in the early parts of the book. It kind of became the, for one of the characters, Dr. Murray, I don't want to give too much away at this moment in time, but these machines are looking to evolve and they use words and phrases used from that book, The Singularity is Near, because that's what it became about. Let's write about artificial intelligence. There's this weird juxtaposition between David Miller's mental health and this artificial intelligence becoming more and more powerful in his mind. And it was two great things to just put together and see what happens with it, because it's fucking wacky, man. It's wacky as fuck.
I have so many questions about Dr. Murray, by the way.
Go for it.
Is he like... He's not trying to help David, is he?
It's weird because, right, I will give away this much, right? Because it is very early on in the book that this revelation comes about. But
yeah, I'm trying to speak in riddles because I don't want to.
I don't mind. But, all right, no, I won't give this away. But Dr. Murray, he's a very utilitarian character. He's very pragmatic, very sort of black and white. And he generally does want to help David, but he has a bigger cause that goes beyond.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, because the idea is that it's not so much that it subverts expectations, but as the story goes along, you think you have an idea because there's all these different writing styles, all these different narrative styles. But the one I use predominantly in the book is what's known as third person limited, or POV. Third person limited means that you are in the mind of the character, but it's being told through the third person. So the narration, the descriptions is really from the prejudice of that character. Mm-hmm. And because he's got amnesia, the reader only figures out something when David Miller, figures something out. So you're constantly catching up alongside him. And it takes, I can tell you from experience, in the 4.5 years it took me to write the fucking thing, it has to be done a particular way. It does take yeah,
I get you. That was a fucking a choice you made to write in that fucking perspective. So.
Exactly. I mean, 90% of the time I'm using third person limited, but occasionally when he writes his diary in chapter 3, he writes a little diary in chapter 7. I'm using first person because that was the only time, going back to what I said earlier.
Was that a genuine artistic choice to write like in that third person?
It was one I preferred, and it was most appropriate considering I'm talking about an amnesiac. I mean, I could have wrote in first person if I wanted to.
No, but no, it fits with the story. I'm just saying, like, that's why it must have took so long, because to write in that style, fuck me.
From what I understand, most new authors will write in first person. Yeah. But it just wasn't for me. I don't like first person. I do use first person very, very, like, not often.
No, because I narrate. I use third person, but the way you use it, I mean, because then again, none of my characters have amnesia, so.
Mm.
But then it like me thinking about it now in my head, I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's got because it's got to play on your mind every time you're writing. You got to write. Jesus, Daniel. Fair enough.
But to be fair, it was only really again, in a lot of the reason why it took so long for me to write it, it wasn't just the story itself. It was I was trying to learn how to write. I was learning how my style, and it wasn't really till about 2018, the 2-year mark, that I started to consistently be like, right, I've been reading Elmore Leonard, I've been reading Chuck Palahniuk. I want to write not write like them, but in the same style. That's what most speaks to me. That's how I best articulate my voice. And to any writer out there, that's my advice to them: is find the best way to articulate your voice. And that's for me.
100%. You want to know how to write the way you want to write before you can start writing the project you want to write. I'd say anyway, because I've always not always wrote in third person. I've sometimes wrote in first person, but third person is what I landed on. And obviously,
and there's different types of third person. You've got third person limited, which is the one I use. There's third person objective, which is you're not really in the mind of any character. They're just sort of there, kind of like Agatha Christie. She uses that, the whodunits sort of storytelling, where you're not in the minds of any of the characters. The narrator is just sort of giving you an example. It's kind of, I can't think on the top of my head other than that Agatha Christie. Stephen King, maybe. Nah, he's a bit more third person POV. And then you've got the omniscient narrator, which is like Tolkien. The narrator knows everything. Yeah,
that's kind of my style, but not as detailed as Tolkien.
That's it. Whereas I like to, because I'm a character writer, I focus on third person POV. But so going back to about my dad and the veterans, again, I noticed their behavior, which was they were very funny. They were wise. They had a lot of wisdom in the way they spoke. But again, didn't really open the door emotionally. So I had to stay consistent to the character. And that writer's instinct did kick in every once in a while when every time I tried for David to open up emotionally, it didn't come off correctly. So I had to get rid of it. So I had to work around his trauma, his PTSD. And that's why we'll talk about Mr. Sandman in a second. So that's why I used the diary in chapter 3 and a little bit of chapter 7, because it was the only way I was going to be able to get him to openly, talk his emotions, because he was incapable of opening up because of the trauma that he had experienced. And there's a big trauma because he suffers with a dissociative identity disorder known as psychogenic fugue, which is where someone creates a sort of alter ego in order to distance themselves from the pain, the trauma that they experienced, and can have amnesia-like effects as well as other issues. And that's the other character in the story, Spike. I don't mind giving this away because it is pretty evident very early on in the book that this Spike character who warns him that the war's not over and there's information in his head the enemy are after, Spike is actually just an extension of David. Sort of his rage, his anger. And as his memory starts coming back, this sort of manifestation, this rage within him starts to come out of him. And it was so interesting to write because it had a lot of similarities to my own situation, my own relationship with my dad, because my dad's called Spike. But the Spike character in the novel isn't necessarily a carbon copy of my own dad. It's more the essence. I think this goes back to Jordan Peterson. He talks about, well, not even just Jordan Peterson, but Carl Jung talks about what's known as the archaic man. The archaic man is sort of this beast within us that consists of our lineage, our heritage, going way back to 100,000, 150,000 years ago. We've inherited that DNA from all those different lifetimes through our genetic makeup. Mm-hmm. And we have that within us. And, this is quite deep what I'm saying here. And it's kind of the first time I've really openly spoken about it. But, me and my dad have a lot of similarities, good and bad. We're both very sociable, gregarious, we're both very looking to put a smile on people's faces, but we also have and more so him as well, this kind of rage, this kind of contempt for certain things and the story really was my way of saying, I'm going to try and be my own man because I'm nearly 30 years of age now. And it's like, okay, I'm going to be my own person now. As David tries to say to his alter ego, I'm going to be my own man. I don't want this rage in me anymore. I want to be me. Because I grew up with my dad suffering with PTSD from the ages of 4 to 8 years of age. And this is even said in the novel. I was raised primarily by my father for those 4 years. And he did a good job. He was good. He taught me to be tough. He taught me to be intellectual. He was always getting me to learn about geography and space and anatomy, from a very young age. So that's where a lot of my knowledge comes from, is based on his upbringing, encouraging me to just absorb everything. But then because of his PTSD, because of his certain life choices, he went off the rails when I was about 8 years of age. And I went back to my mum's, and I kind of watched him deteriorate over the next 10 years. But luckily he turned it all around and got his treatment and did all right. And when I was about 19 years of age, this is just after he got the all clear with his hepatitis C, me and him go to Glasgow. And for the first, and we went to a place called Loch Awe, and we're skimming stones. Loch Awe is a beautiful place in Scotland. You've got like these tall mountains, and we're skimming stones and all that. And we essentially had our first conversation as men, and it was really, really profound. And that was when the next part of our relationship began, after that sort of 10-year weird hiatus. And I explore a lot of that in metaphor in the book. You know, David Miller's relationship with his own father, and therefore his relationship with this hypothetical version of himself. I hope I'm not being come across as too convoluted, but in philosophy, they talk about the Übermensch. I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche that talks about this hypothetical version of ourselves that consists of all our highest ideals. That's where religion comes from. That's where God comes from. It's like, oh, this is what I wish to see in myself and in the world. And that's kind of like what Spike is to David, but in a kind of fucked up way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's fucking, I don't know. I hope I'm explaining it well enough. But, you know, it's David says to his own father in the book, because his father crops up in flashbacks and his name's never specified and his face is never revealed. But in the few interactions that they have, David says to his father, like, I always wanted to be just as smart, as strong and as intelligent as you. And his dad says to him, I am proud of you, son, but don't be like me, be your own man. And that's what my book's trying to say about me now that I'm 29 going on 30. I'm like, right, this book is my way of saying, right, I'm past these moments of being lost and running around trying to find my purpose, whether it be going to France or working all these different jobs. And it's like, no, I'm happy in who I am now. I'm my own man now. I'm ready to move on to the next chapter of my life.
All right, then. So let me ask you this. So how you've described it there, how would you want someone to take that as they're reading it? Obviously, because that's personal to you. If someone's reading that, would they feel the same? Obviously, they're not going to think of you and be like, oh, that's Dan. You know what I mean? They're going to think of their self. And do you know what I mean? Do you reckon they'll feel the impact of that?
I think so, because like, again, we always, not everyone's fortunate enough to have their parents in their lives. You know, I mean, me and my dad had a bit of a tumultuous relationship for that 10-year period, but it was never, he was still there. It's just that he was dealing with his own demons. And it worked out fine. In the end, he found himself again. John Lennon broke up with Yoko Ono for about 18 months, and John Lennon went off the rails, just got hammered for 18 months. And he called that his lost weekend. And essentially that's what my dad went through for 9 years. He went through his own lost weekend. And it wasn't until he came back out of his, what's the treatment? So, because he had hepatitis C, but he had the treatment, interferon, it was called. He had the interferon treatment, and that got rid of the disease. And he's all good now. And thank God, because he'd be dead by now if he hadn't. And we got to, you know, have another go at our relationship, and sort of, I forgave him and he forgave himself, and we sort of moved on from that. But it really depends, because the reader's going to take from it what they will take from it. They might just take it at face value, or they might see a relationship with their own parents or their own father, because that's what it boils down to. It's like Spike represents not my dad, but the Spike character in the book is basically the personification of all of David's trauma and rage. He like this revolutionary that exists in him, that he wants to change the world. Spike says to David in a flashback in chapter 5, after something horrific happens, Spike looks back at David and says, take a good look around you, David. This world is evil, and as a means of surviving it, so are we. And that kind of really encapsulates Spike. You know, we aren't the good guys. We're not the good guys, but it's the world that's evil, and therefore so are we as an instinct. You know, he wants to burn it all down. Like David wants to burn the system to the very ground, and you see that being demonstrated as the story progresses. As the artificial intelligence becomes more powerful, it kind of molds with David's trauma. Like I said, the juxtaposition between his decline in mental health and the growth of this artificial intelligence.
Exactly.
A lot of people who haven't read the book that'll be listening to this will be like, what? But then they'll read the book and come back to this and it will make a lot more sense.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it's weird because
that's a good thing about doing this, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing as well is like I've never actually gone to this much length to fully articulate like the process. And again, you know me, I'm not good with structure. I like to just sort of bounce from point to point in no particular order and just hope for the best, you know, because I'm not going to edit any of this. I'm just going to fucking put it out there.
That's the thing, and it's good. It's fucking, you gotta grill me when I fucking do mine. So
exactly.
There you go.
So I'll look. So when it comes to the story itself, when it goes on about the Atlantic War, so one of the things I want to talk about is anarcho-capitalism. For those who don't know what that is, it's a political theory, a sort of philosophical theory. It's a society with no state, no government, no laws, no regulation. It is run purely by private enterprises and free trade. And people might
like that place in Hong Kong.
Oh, the City of Anarchy, which was Kowloon Walled City.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. Because again, I'm not trying to predict anything, but it's quite scary what I'm seeing happening now, this year and last year, with what's going on in the world. I'm seeing what's happening in America.
What's going on now?
Well, I'm not going to go into too much details, but I'll tell you what I see in America. You know, you've got this big split down the middle between the Reds and the Blues, the Democrats and the Republicans. And the Republicans themselves are very what's called libertarian. They're all about individual sovereignty. And anarcho-capitalism is a more extreme version of that libertarian mindset. So for a long, long time, I was really struggling with the middle part of the book. I already had an idea of what was happening, but I didn't have the glue, the foundations that would help me run with it. Because once you might experience this, and anyone else watching this might experience this, but you have an intention of something you want to write, but you keep putting it off. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you can't be asked. It's because you haven't really got something there to run with. And I always need something real that I can run with to use that as the basis for the fictional story I'm going to tell. So I come across the idea of anarcho-capitalism. I'm thinking, right, what? I need to look more into this. And I came across a book by a man named J. Michael Oliver called New Libertarianism, Anarcho-Capitalism. And it basically breaks down this philosophy. And that is kind of the driving point behind the Americans in this book. It's not about countries or borders. It's about a whole ideology. So in my book, I describe that anarcho-capitalism spread to 3/4 of the world. And the only part of the world that isn't anarcho-capitalist is Europe, which I call the Democratic Socialist of Deutschland, which is a socialist technocracy. And that consists of Europe and Southern England. And that's the side that David's fighting on. He's from Southern England. So he was fighting against the invaders, the ANCAPs. And
the ANCAPs, the Americans.
Yeah, well, not even just Americans, but for the most part, yeah. But they're portrayed as American, but it's 3/4 of the world. Anarcho-capitalism. It's just whole societies with no state, no government, not necessarily they don't have leaders. They do have leaders, but instead of having presidents or prime ministers, an anarcho-capitalist society would consist of CEOs and, you know, I mean,
business owners and shit.
Exactly, because it's all about free trade. And people would ask the question, well, how would you have a functioning society if there are no laws? Well, they technically do have laws, but it's based on the epistemology. Is that what they call it? The philosophy of it is known as Objectivism, which comes from a Russian American named Ayn Rand. And she describes it as the only laws are objective laws. Like gravity is an objective law. It cannot be disputed. You jump off your roof, you're landing on the floor. That's an objective law, right? So let's say, for example, right, you live in a society with no state and you want to sell coffee beans. Technically, there's nothing stopping you, right? You want to go sell coffee beans, go sell coffee beans. The problem is, in a free market, 100,000 other people are going to be selling coffee beans. So what do you do to be the best at making, selling, distributing coffee beans? Well,
use my secret ingredient.
Secret ingredients, and not just that, but it's within your best interest to be a morally good person. Not based on any constitution, not based on any law, but based on your own best interest to put a roof over your head and sell those fucking coffee beans. Oh, Sean's great. He's a really nice guy. I really like his ethics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that secret flavor in that coffee bean's really nice.
But you know what I mean? Like, you would govern yourself.
Yeah, I get you.
Because it's within your own best interest. If you fuck people over and you stop being an arsehole, no one's going to buy your coffee beans. That's how anarcho-capitalism works.
I can't remember what video I was watching yesterday, but this guy was talking about it, like, because he buys a lot of Pokemon cards in cases, sealed and shit. I know it's nerdy as fuck, but he sells a lot, and he was saying, like, I sell my products sealed as if I would want to buy them, because you wouldn't want to get fucked over yourself. You know what I mean? It's like, do good things. I know it comes back to karma and all that shit, but it's just the same type of
exactly
thing.
People think that, oh, laws exist because we need them. It's like, no. We all have our own morality.
Would you say karma is the same as gravity, or do you reckon karma is just like fairy bullshit?
Not necessarily, because you can actually see karma exist as an actual thing, in the sense that you do something bad to someone else and they do something bad to you. Is that karma? That's cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, karma exists. Yeah, it exists in a cause and effect manner. But but again, like, I gave you a very kind of, not necessarily convoluted, but quite a dense explanation of anarcho-capitalism.
But then some people would say karma is like governed by faith.
Yeah, so faith, that's more of a pre-modernist sort of mentality, whereas, objectivism and anarcho-capitalism and libertarianism, that's sort of more focused on modernism. So modernism is more my kind of thing. I was reading a book by a man named Stephen Hicks, I think his name was.
It goes back to the science versus faith question, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. So for the longest time, so I'll break it down for you, right? So you've got pre-modernism, modernism, and postmodernism, right? So pre-modernism is...
What about metamodernism? Is that... Sorry, Karen.
Pre-modernism consists of tradition. It consists of faith, and it consists of... I forgot what the third thing was, but you know what I mean? It's like, you are not in control of your own life. Something else is. So for a long, long time, that's how we functioned as a society. It's like there's this hierarchical structure above us that's like, this is, original sin, God's will, right?
Yeah.
That's how a lot of people went about their day. Mysticism, faith, tradition. But then you had people, I want to say the 1800s, you started to get people along the lines of Francis Bacon, René Descartes, and John Locke. They were sort of the founders of modernism. They were the philosophers who said, no, it's not about God. It's about us. We use reason to traverse this reality, to understand this reality. And that's kind of, the origins of what would become, objectivism and libertarianism. You are responsible for yourself.
Fucking ironic as well. Now I've just realized it. This probably ain't going to make much sense to you as well, but there's a character in Lost called John Locke, right? And he is, in the beginning, he's all about faith, and like everything that's happening on this island is happening because of like something out, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you've got the other main character called Jack, and he's all about what the John Locke you've described about fucking man of science, reason. He's a doctor. He's fucking... You're gonna fucking love Lost, mate. I tell you.
I can't wait to watch it. We'll be doing a reaction when when we got the studio, when you're down here.
Oh, mate,
yeah. So maybe that John Locke's based on the John Locke in philosophy, the sort of...
Yeah, because as Lost unfolds, it like
John Locke becomes more like the John Locke that he was based on, the modernist.
Not really.
Right.
The Jack becomes more like the John Locke in the show.
Right, I got it.
He starts becoming more of the faith.
Yeah.
And then John Locke starts becoming more like...
Yeah. So
I don't want to.
No, it's cool. It's cool. But yeah, so that, again, I've given quite a dense explanation of, libertarianism and objectivism and all that. It's not like that in the book. It's sprinkled here and there, because it's all about, for me, it's all about subtext, going back to dialogue. I want to make sure that, let the characters explain their version of what they think's going on in the world.
Oh yeah, I'd say like it's sprinkled with like inspirations, but there's no outline, like...
Yeah, because
do you know what I mean? Genre.
When it comes to exposition, you've got to be very, very careful, because me in the early days, like anybody, you just sort of doing what we call an exposition dump, just a narrator explaining everything, and that's not a good way to tell a story, because again, the golden rule of storytelling is show, don't tell. So throughout this 4.5-year period, I was learning how best to put exposition in there without it making look like exposition. Inception does it very, very well. And I'll tell you how Inception does it well. We've already explained this in previous podcasts, but it's a very complicated plot device of dreams and navigating shared dream universes, right? So they have a character called Ariana, and Ariana is the new person. And so she's asking all the questions. She's essentially the stand-in for the audience. And you're getting all these exposition dumps, but it's done very clever. It's done in a very clever manner, where it's not just like a narrator. It's like Don Cobb's explained to Ariana as she's figuring out. She is a stand-in for the audience. And I didn't do it necessarily in the same way, but two guys will be in a pub having a conversation, and one guy is a journalist and he's explaining what the anarcho-capitalists are. Within chapter 6, he's explained to Hackby about, these are what they believe in. They believe that the state, the government, is oppressing the human spirit of liberty. Along those lines, I'm just paraphrasing. And that kind of gives audience an understanding of what anarcho-capitalism is, because they're introduced to it in chapter 3 and they're going to have questions, and it's slowly kind of not explained, but just kind of spoken about throughout the story. Yeah. And the consequences, what we call externalities, the cause and effect, the negative consequences of certain things in politics or in the world, without it being crammed down people's throats. It's just sort of half-baked conversations of how they perceive the world.
It's the best way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I nailed it for the most part, is to the best of my ability, of trying to explain complicated parts of the story in casual conversation between characters.
Yeah, I think you did a good job, my friend.
I appreciate it, mate. But
well, I don't want to sit here and kiss your ass. I'm here to be the intermediary interviewer, aren't I?
Well, that's it. And more than anything, I'm looking forward to just giving it for my friends and family first. Let me just put this on Do Not Disturb. It's my girlfriend, bless her. She's a lovely lady, and she's been great during this process. She's really helped. She always gave me outside perspective when I was passing by plot points to her, and she'd be like, well, why not make that character a woman instead of a man? And it would change everything. It would change the dynamic. So she was great during all that. So thank you, Rachel. You're amazing. What else is I going to go on to? But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to my friends and family reading this book and seeing what they take from it, and eventually then seeing what strangers think of it when they buy it. Whose
opinion matters most, or does it not matter?
Doesn't really matter, because I'm happy with it. I can honestly just take a step back and be like, I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and it's my first book.
I'd say there's a difference between being happy that it's done and glad that it's done. See, if you're glad that it's done, I don't think then you would have cared that much. Yeah,
I'm not glad it's done. I was actually kind of sad, not like really sad, but I was relieved, and at the same time I was like, oh, that's it. You know what I mean? But it's my first book, so I'm only 29 years old. That's quite young in terms of a writer. Writers can, as an athlete, 29 is getting on a bit. But as a writer, I can go on till I'm 70, 80, as long as my mind's functioning.
I'm telling you, 40 is the new athletes retiring. Look at Ibrahimovic and Ronaldo and that. Man.
Sure. But even then, that's 10 years away. So 10 years can go quick. You look at the 10 years for us.
Yeah, but then now, I'm going to say 50 is going to be the new retiring point.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
With 10 years' time.
Hormone therapy, TRT, HG, human growth hormone, you name it. It's adding 10 years onto people's youth.
Steroids.
Well, steroids. I haven't taken them, but I'm not against them. If done correctly, it can be very beneficial if done correctly.
I mean,
if done with a licensed physician. If you have the money, if you're just some prick on the street just taking steroids off some dealer, you're gonna have.
What about those dudes that get fucking plastic surgery to have beastie six packs and pecs and that? Do you reckon that's scum of the earth?
I wouldn't. I mean, it's unfortunate. I'd say that much. I mean,
that's just really lazy, though, isn't it? You have lazy. That amount of money. Why don't you just pay a personal trainer and get ripped as fuck?
Exactly.
Naturally,
women can't choose how their breasts are naturally. So I completely understand why they would get breast augmentation or boob jobs. I completely support them in that regard. But with men with fake abs, or even women with fake abs, or just fake muscles in general, there's no need for it. There's no, unless you've got.
All right, let me ask you this question then. What about someone so insecure about their calves and they got fake calves? Would you condone that?
No, because again, it's so easy to get good calves. All you got to do is calf raises and plyometric exercises, jumping squats. You can develop the calves. just take a little bit of time out of your day for 30
All
minutes
right,
a day.
then. What about? I don't want to name drop here because it ain't that sort of podcast. So, remember the guy from school who had FA Cup ears, and he wanted to get an ear. What's the technical term for getting your ears pinned back or whatever? I don't know.
Oh, I know what you mean, like the big holes back in the day. Yeah.
No, just the big. He had like
Oh,
wide
right.
ears.
Did he get his ears pinned back? I didn't know that.
No, I'm just saying. What if someone like that decided to get plastic surgery?
You know what's funny? Like this ties into like what we were just discussing about this whole libertarian mindset. It's like, fucking do what you want. You are an individual. You do what you desire. As long as you're not harming anyone else, fucking go for it.
People like my mum, for example, she'll ask why I've got a hole in my ear. I don't really know how to describe it. Yeah, some sort of fashion, like following. Yeah. I think, but like,
why do most people do?
My answer is always, oh, it's for my ancient ancestor brethren.
Why does anyone do anything? Mostly for aesthetics reasons, really, for the most part.
Yeah, true, man.
Why
like, I just woke up one day and wanted to get piercings. You know what I mean? It was just a spur of the moment thing. You know, it wasn't a fucking be all and end all life decision. Do you know what I mean? Just a fucking
exactly.
Superficial at the end of the day, isn't it? It's just, I don't know.
By the way, I want to go back to something that we'll talk about earlier about future predictions. We were talking about the sort of divide between America with the Democrats and the Republicans. You know, you've got the sort of authoritarian Democrats who rely on the state to oversee their decision making, and the libertarians see that as a sort of infringement on being human.
We should totally have Tim Warner in now for this discussion.
I know, but he'll go off on one, so not today.
No,
we'll catch up with him again soon. But so I see today, I mean, the book takes place in 2050 or 2049. It starts off roughly, but I see it playing out already in 2021. You know, the Americans are essentially could well be overthrowing their own government in favor of a stateless society. If the Republicans fight back, it could be a civil war. I don't really go in, I don't mention civil war in my book, but this is just in my own head. I could see that being potentially the birth of anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah, but like you would have thought that after the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, but nothing really happened.
That's only the beginning, though, and that was. I don't want to go into too much details because we all know what our opinions are on that, and that's just the beginning. That's just like, right, cool. That just goes to show you can defend yourself now, even if it is a hairy situation. No one should have to die that day, but it happened the way it happened. We know the truth because I followed the case very, very closely.
See, when you watch that video back as well, someone tried to fucking like drop kick him while he was on the floor.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Man, I hate anything, right? Have a fair fight, yeah, whatever. But if someone's on the floor, never fucking stand like someone standing on their head. Oh man, that fucking riles. That really riles my fellas.
Based on how we feel about the world today, I think if there is any hope, it's the Americans, the Republicans. I'm not saying I necessarily am a Republican. I'm not, but I'm not left wing either. I'm not a socialist. I'm not authoritarian. I'm a middle right leaning libertarian by definition. I am all in favor. Not all in favor, because if we were to become a stateless society tomorrow, a lot of people would suffer, and it would take a long time for it to correct itself. It would take a long time for human nature to sort of balance itself out, because you got to bear in mind, if everything became anarcho-capitalist tomorrow, that means there'd be no state. So people who depend on state benefits, people who are generally not just leeching off the system, people who are generally ill due to no fault of their own, it'd be them that suffers. Mm-hmm. And the anarcho-capitalists argue, well, you know, there would be private charities. Yeah, but not tomorrow. That'll take a little while for, you know, altruism exists in capitalism. Altruism being, you know, doing something out of the kindness of your heart without seeking any return. That would exist through private charities, but it would take a while for it to emerge, and people would die. People would die. There'd be no NHS. It'd all be private. And it'd be the survival of the fittest. And a lot of those negative things I've just pointed out are demonstrated in the book.
It's a possibility at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah. And but I do see that it could well be a civil war. This not in the book, in reality. I could see there being a civil war, some sort emerging in America in the next couple of years. And it's either going to go one way or the other. And if it goes that way, then that means anarcho-capitalism could be the next thing that happens. And it could well be.
Is that why you chose like 2049 as a date?
Yeah, 2049.
Yeah.
I don't know why I chose that year. I can't even remember. That goes way back to the first drafts. It was just a year out, maybe because Blade Runner was around the corner. The sequel to Blade Runner was around the corner. And I just thought, you know what? I like that year. Because I wanted the main protagonist to have been born, be a baby by the time as the story's being written.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because what they were born into this crazy world that I've created. And, 2018, David Miller, technically the story begins in 2049 and he is 31 years old. So that means he was born in 2018, and how much has the world changed already since 2018? Fucking a lot.
Crazy, man.
You know what I mean? And anyway, so there was a few things I did kind of predict just out of mostly satire and humor, but later on in the book, and this doesn't give anything away, this is a story within a story. I wrote a short story called Ding Dong, right? And the reason why by the end of the second act, there are two characters, David Miller and Hackby, and their arcs are kind of pretty much covered. So I wrote myself into a corner and I was like, oh, fuck, I still have a third of this book to write. And I don't know what to write about because the main characters, for the most part, these characters, their stories, their arcs have kind of come to an end. So there's nothing more to really write about. There is another character, but people figure that out when they read the book. So I had to take it in a different direction for that last third. And what happened was I had writer's block. This is 2020. I had writer's block for a good 5-6 months, really trying to figure out where do I take the story from here. And I was watching an episode of Black Mirror and I was on season 4 and it was an episode called Black Museum. And the premise of the episode is that this lady is in the middle of the desert and there's a museum and a guy comes along, the proprietor or the curator, whatever his name is called Roland. And he says, oh, not many people come around here. And he goes in and inside the museum, it's called Black Museum. There's all these sort of art things encased in glass. And something went off in my head and I thought, I'm going to do that. Not necessarily the same objects, but the same set, and have someone walk someone through a museum and point at all these different objects. And that each of those objects tells its own story, like an anthology. So I came up with my own version of it. And one of them was a doorbell. The smart doorbells that we get today, the rings. Mm-hmm. My version was called Ding Dong. So I had a lot of fun with this particular short story. It's only about 6 pages long. But Ding Dong, it goes back to a couple of years after our present, let's say 2023. I don't specify the year specifically, but I do hint at, and this was just after the George Floyd protest that I wrote this short story, where you started to see a mass exodus of people leaving a lot of the blue states, like California, like New York, a bit like what Joe Rogan did. A lot of people left to go live in the red states, like Texas, like Florida, like Tennessee. So I described that, but not everybody had the means of leaving these decrepit communities. And there's this one woman named Lily, and Lily was a school teacher, but now redundant because the part of the US that she's living in has gone to shit. There's vagrants outside, rioting, burning the place down, and she's stuck. And one day, a representative comes to the door saying, oh, I'd like to offer you a service. There's part of a trial period. Here's my card. She reads the card and it says something about Ding Dong. And it's essentially a doorbell that is connected via satellite, that connects to a private police firm. Because again, going into anarcho-capitalism, when there's no state police. And it kind of falls in line with the whole hashtag defund the police that was going on last year with the George Floyd thing. So in my made up future, there is no more police to defend the community. So now up and coming private firms have come to take their place. And it's connected to this doorbell service. And she doesn't have to pay a penny for it because she'd be essentially part of a trial. And she immediately signs up for it. So the installation team comes along and fits the doorbell for her. And they say, oh yeah, the operator is a man named Marshall. He's a real gentleman. He'll look after you. And off the guy goes. And Lily starts hitting it off very well with Marshall. She can't see him. It's just a voice from the doorbell. And they start to form some form of weird, not necessarily an intimate relationship, but they start opening up to one another and disclose their deepest secrets and insecurities. But Marshall starts to get a bit too attached almost. And Christmas comes along and she's depressed because the whole family are gone. And she used to be quite, not resentful, but she was just frowned upon Christmas, just thought it was all commercial bullshit. But now, because her family's gone, she's distraught. She's like, I can't spend another Christmas on my own. And the next day, Marshall says, Lily, is everything all right? No response. So Marshall sends a couple of representatives to go check her out. She tried to take her own life and they take her to hospital. Luckily, she survives. And when she comes back a couple of weeks later, Marshall was like, you need to upgrade your privileges so you can have cameras installed all around the house. Lily says, that's a bit fucking too Orwellian for my liking. But eventually, Marshall wears her down and she eventually gives up and says, fine, whatever. Anyway, so the whole vagrant situation starts to calm down a little bit. Like I said, with the anarcho-capitalism, human nature starts to balance itself out and people start moving back into the cul-de-sacs and the communities. And there's a man named Derek from across the street that moves into the home and introduces himself, and him and Lily start hitting it off. But meanwhile, Marshall is listening in on the conversation. A couple of weeks later, Derek says to Lily, come have a drink with me. Let's go out for a date. She's like, okay, fine. But Marshall's like, I don't approve of this. It's not safe out there. I'll do, just to warn you, I'll do whatever it takes to ensure the safety and well-being of the client. And she's like, whatever, and goes out with Derek. They come back midnight, fumble around and, have sex. And Marshall's watching the whole time. Derek goes off to work the next day, leaving poor Lily alone with Marshall, who's just lecturing her, saying, this isn't safe. I don't approve of this. I will do whatever it takes to ensure your safety and well-being. She's like, you're fucking crazy. And she goes to cancel the service. But the representative on the phone says, if you cancel before the trial period's up, you'll have to pay back all of it. And she's like, well, how long do I have to wait? And the representative says, about 6 weeks. And Lily's like, fuck me. She contemplates packing an overnight bag and staying at Derek's, saying that she's getting a hard time for my doorbell. That's how I wrote it in the book. But then she decides not to. She's like, fuck it, 6 weeks. I can handle this doorbell operator. It'll be fine. But the next day she wakes up and sees that Derek's being dragged away out of his house, thrown into the back of one of these private police vans. And he's screaming, I'm being framed. It wasn't me. I'm being framed. Lily freaks out, puts her shoes on and goes to get out the door, and it won't open. It's locked. Marshall says, I'm sorry. It's not safe outside. She freaks out, grabs a chair to throw out the window, and it triggers the house into a full lockdown. 6 weeks later, some of the ding-dong representatives come to the house and notice it's in full lockdown. And they ask Marshall, what's going on here? Marshall doesn't respond, so they override the system and go in, and they find Lily in the kitchen dead. There's no food left in the house, and she's chewed into a candlestick, laying in a bloated purple hand. The twist of the story is that Marshall was not even human. He was a new type of artificial intelligence designed to basically placate those who had grown weary of automation. So they thought the company behind the doorbell said, well, let's try and create an operator that is so convincing that people would naturally assume it was human, but it was almost too human.
And the only part of the book you can spoil.
Yeah, exactly. So that's only a 6-page short story about one of the characters explaining about the doorbell. He said it's a romance story, and the girl was like, who's with the guy, said, a romance story, and he goes, albeit a very tragic one at that. He tells the story. You know what I mean? So that doesn't fucking sell the book. I don't know what will. But the whole book itself is about 205 pages. That's in manuscript. I don't know what it will be in physical, but 205 pages. That's 6 pages out of the whole book. And that's just a character telling a story.
So when are you not saying a release date yet now?
It will be 90% likely going to be December, unless something goes wrong. But everything on my side's done. The cover's done.
Unless the printer fucking sets on fire.
Yeah, exactly. And the guy. Touchwood. Well, like I said, once the printer's done what he's done, I'm also going to be releasing it as an ebook on Amazon, and hopefully the Amazon paperback copies are good quality, because I'll also be doing that as well. It'll be available on Amazon primarily, and I'll be having 50 books printed that I can sell to people signed I'm selling at £8.99. I think the ebook's going to be £6.99 or £5.99. Haven't decided yet, but yeah. And
people are going to want that artwork,
Oh, the artwork's amazing. It's done by a man named Stefan Martinier. So the story with Stefan is that I first stumbled upon his work with David Louis Edelman.
David Lewis and Edelman.
Edelman, that's
actually.
It. He wrote a book called Infoquake, and on Infoquake is a beautiful artwork. They say never judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you just have to. And Stefan Martinier's artwork was on the front cover, and it was beautiful. And a couple of years later, I was about 20 at the time, I thought, I want to look at more of this guy's artwork, and I was blown away, and eventually bought one of his paintings or one of his drawings, which is now the front cover of my book. It's called Memory, and it coincidentally it looks a bit like me in the picture, even though this thing was done back in 2007. It looks a bit like me and my dad. I thought that's perfect.
Crazy.
One half of his face is sort of in shadow, and I thought that just fucking sums up everything that I want to say about the book just in the cover. Because this is a man tackling his own demons in amongst this high concept idea of artificial intelligence and singularity and, anarcho-capitalism. Meanwhile, you've just got this character dealing with his fucking demons. And so I contacted Stefan about a month ago, and I said, look, I would like to hire you. You remember, because we were corresponding back and forth during the time Total Recall 2012 had come out, and we were fanboying over it. And he said, look, it's going to cost you like $3,000 to $5,000, but you're more than welcome to just purchase some of the secondhand rights to one of my pre-existing pictures. So I had a little look, and I thought, boom, that's the one that's on my wall. I want that. So I purchased the rights, and I have them for 5 years. If the book does well and it gets to 5 years, I'll do it again.
There you go.
Wasn't too expensive. For 5 years, pretty good. And he did me a little solid and gave me the rights to the ebook as well. So win-win.
And that's it, and it's worth it at the end of the day. It's another part of, like, what's the word I'm looking for? The fucking stone brain. The organization of coming up to the release, like artwork, cover, book, paperback, ebook, like you've got it all covered. Like
yeah.
Proofread, edited.
Got my own editor. Got my own. It was funny. So the editor I got was a woman named Julia. Give her a shout out. But I could tell it was a perfect dynamic, really, because she was not the audience for the book. Put it that way. Right, very classy, middle class woman, middle age. Just very, very respectable lady. And she's not the audience. Let's put it bluntly. Right. So some of her notes, and she was great. Like I took all her notes on board and made all the very small changes that she recommended. But there were some changes. It was just humor that went way over her head. So there's one scene in FauxVille around chapter 9 where David is in the anarcho-capitalist settlement called New Kansas in Eastern Europe. And just like I've described, it's kind of like Blade Runner, very futuristic, very, flashing holograms. I don't go into too much detail about it, but you get the impression that this is a pretty functioning place. And one of the characters takes David to the dingy parts of town. And I just describe it as guns, drugs, plastic straws. This place had it all. Right? And she just put a little remark saying, plastic straws? The joke being that,
do you reckon that's the way she read it as well? She's like reading this, she's like, oh yeah.
Because plastic straws. Plastic straws. That's what I mean. And she's like, huh? And but that's the joke is like in my future, plastic straws are on the black market. Not that a black market doesn't exist.
That's not even far off the fucking future now. But that's funny.
There is no such thing as a black market in a stateless society, but it was just the more dingier parts where you can get whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah.
Plastic straws being one of them. And I thought, again, it's all about using
she's never bought drugs in her life. Like, that's
exactly. She's not the audience. It's like, it reminds you of that part of when Quentin Tarantino was in an interview around the time Kill Bill Volume 1 came out, and he's getting slated by this woman because he's recommending that parents should take their kids to go see Kill Bill, because in America, as long as you got a parent with you, you can pretty much watch fucking anything.
All right.
A little bit different to how it is in the UK, so.
I was like 10 and my mum's husband bought me a CD the other day.
Yeah, but that's a 12. That's a 12.
I was 15 at the time.
Was it?
I swear,
okay.
I'm sure it was.
Well, anyway.
I'm always positive. But anyway, yeah, fuck it, who cares?
Quentin Tarantino's getting slated by this woman. She's an arsehole anyway. And then by the end of it, he's just like, well, I didn't make it for you, Janet.
Yeah.
and that's how I felt about like, even, you know, Julia's great at what she did, and I'll always go to her for my editing from now on, because she's the perfect person for that sort of thing. She's not going to kiss my ass. She's not going to be like, oh, I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, that's what you want, man.
I need someone to be like, you need to fix this and this, but I accept that some of the things are just going to go way over her head, and I just have to take that on the chin and be like, I didn't make it for you, Janet.
Make it for you, Julia. Yeah, I get you.
And so that was who my editor was, and I recommend, you know, because originally my intention was I was going to try and find an agent, and the way to get an agent these days is that you sort of get like 3 chapters or 10,000 words or 15,000 words with a little synopsis, and you just send it out there in an email with a covering letter and all this. It's a lot of bullshit. And a few of them kind of got back to me and said, thank you for contacting us, but it's not what we're looking for. And I just kind of stopped and thought, these aren't publishers. These are fucking agents. All right. These are the people that'll be representing me. And it's like, I don't need their fucking permission to publish my book. I'll do it myself. In this day and age, we spoke about this already on podcast, the idea of the term prosumer. We're now in an era of the digital age where the consumer and the producer have become the same thing. That's what I am. I'm a prosumer.
Where else are you going to be able to smoke fucking joints and talk about your book willy-nilly and have a good time, and you know what I mean, and just fucking, you know what I mean, try and sell your book, and have it, you know, say you're on a fucking TV show having an interview with so Daniel, chapter 1 really went over my head. Can you explain the corridor section? Do you know what I mean? Like, you get you'd get criticized more than you'd get to explain. You know what I mean?
So I thought, you know what? I'll do it myself. Get a team of decent people. Luckily, I want to give a shout out to my dad, Spike, and Donna. They were great. Donna especially, very helpful when it came to hooking me up with Julia, hooking me up with Warren, the printer. And then obviously Stefan was my connection from the past. And I want to give a shout out to Manu. I can't even pronounce his last name. He's French. Manu Deliniere. That's his last name. He's a fucking great dude.
I'll clip all this. This will be a clip.
He did a title for me, and it's a beautiful title. And I'll always be going to him for any titles I do in the future. He's a character in the book, very briefly. He's only in it very, very briefly, but he's called Numa, because in France, he told me the youth in France do this thing where they swap letters around in their names to make another name. So his name is Manu, but his nickname was Numa. So in the book, there's a character called Numa who's a hacker.
My nickname's Nias.
That's a good one. Well, technically, you're 2 characters in the book, because Dr. Murray, Dr. Sean Murray, even though it uses your name, he's not you. It's just your name. But there's a character.
I fucking hope not.
But there's a character in the middle of the book called Benny, and that's you. Technically, a more dumbed down version of you, because Benny's never watched Blade Runner, whereas you have. You know, there's a scene in the book, without giving too much away, there's a particular scene where a character is kind of reliving his past, and it's based on our memories, because why not write what you know and then start to fictionalize it? Always have a strong foundation. And I was writing that scene when we were 20 years of age, me, you, and Brett Hackett. No, your battery's going low, is it? We'll wrap this up soon enough. Nearly done anyway.
Me, you, and Brett Hackett. Yeah, sorry.
One the roof terrace of my house, the customs house in Portland. And we're getting high, getting blazed. We've got a laptop out, and we've got Vangelis playing. And
surely we've got to give a shout out to Vangelis.
Yeah.
He's going to be a massissive inspiration for all of our stories.
Always. Blade Runner, Ridley Scott, Philip K. Dick.
And all he does is make noise. That's the crazy thing.
He produces sound waves.
Massive inspiration.
Massive. I mean, yeah, so it's almost word for word that memory that I put in the book where they described Blade Runner Blues, the song, and the scene about Deckard, because Blade Runner was a very unusual film in the sense that it kind of was less on the action and more on the character, more on the focus of the characters themselves and the philosophical questions it kind of pushes towards you. And there's that one scene where Deckard is kind of weary from that fight he had with the big android, and he goes to drink his scotch or whiskey, whichever it is.
This when he's on the balcony.
Yeah. And you just see that flying cargo pass, and you can see the.
You can just close your eyes and you can just fucking hear the fucking tune.
Yeah, and the funny thing. So Hackby's in the book describing Blade Runner to Benny, and he describes this particular scene, and it came from the heart. The way I described it pretty much came out first time, and incidentally, by pure accident, it almost describes certain aspects of my own book. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's like fucking hell, about the androids looking like people.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy, man.
So any questions? Any other questions you want to go through?
I'll have a look through my notes. I always do this thing where I write notes and don't read them in any of my podcasts whatsoever.
Like I said, this is the first time I've done this, so I apologize if I was a bit all over the place at the beginning, because it's the first time.
You know what, mate? What you described it spoiler free, because at the end of the day, right, you're trying to explain your book and sell it, but you don't want to spoil it because obviously you want people to read it. And
yeah, there's a lot of twists and turns as well, right? The book consists of 15 chapters, and each 5 chapters is its own distinctive act. And the pacing of it is not so much slow, but it just kind of goes along. And then as it progresses through each 5 chapters, it kind of becomes more kinetic and intense. And then it kind of hits a crescendo by that 5th chapter. And then part 2, and it slows again and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. Because in the middle part of the book, in the second act, it's not just David's story, it's also Hackby's story. And it goes Hackby in chapter 6, and then it goes David, chapter 7. And then chapter 8 goes Hackby, David. And then chapter 9 is Hackby, David, Hackby, David. And then by chapter 10, it's Hackby, David, Hackby, David, Hackby, David. So it becomes more kinetic.
yeah.
And then it hits the crescendo, the crisis point, and then boom, part 3 of the book. And then it slows again. And that's what I was going for.
I don't know if I have any questions really, because we've described it beautifully. So anything I'm going to add has already been gone through.
Yeah, we pretty much covered it all. And
Port City is just there because I think it's a cool name for a city.
Port City, yes.
It's inspired by
Bordeaux, yeah. But it's a fictional version of Bordeaux. Because I was living there, you know.
And then I have in brackets, where is it? The other city name.
New Kansas.
Where? Nah, hold on. Apart. Zone 13.
Oh, Apart City.
Yeah.
Right. So sorry, let me clarify this. So Apart City is a real franchise in France of hotel chain, kind of like not like Best Western, but like your Holiday Inns. It's like the French version of Holiday Inn, but it's called Apart City. So it's a hotel basically.
Okay.
I don't specify.
So that's what that is, like Zone 13 Apart City is just like an area. Like
Zone 13 is the district that he's in, because I didn't specify where exactly he was, but Europe in this future is broken up into different zones. And he's just staying in an Apart City in Zone 13.
Yeah, man. I don't think we need to add anything else.
No, that's
more
cool.
Questions from me.
And like I said, this podcast will always be here for those that read the book. Anyone that's still watching this, you know, subscribe. Well, follow our Instagram, our Save Room podcast Instagram, so you can stay updated. The links are in the description, or you can follow my own Instagram, DK_Pike. I'm only on Instagram, not on anything else. To stay, so that you know when the release date is. It'll be in December. And yeah, and then once you've read the book, come back to this podcast, and you know, maybe we'll pick up
100%.
on this. We might pick up on this in 6 months' time. We'll see how the book does. If it does well, and people want to,
no, we definitely have to do a part 2 when we're in the studio.
We'll do like a spoiler version.
Because we've that's what I was going to say. Because we kind of briefly went over things. Spoiler 3, trying not to, you know what I mean? We were trying to sell it. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to ruin it.
Yeah, and like I said, you and I are terrible at being linear. We kind of just go from point to point to point.
Man. Fuck that shit. I mean, there's only a certain number of linear games I can go through.
Yeah.
That's like 2. I mean, yeah, Resident Evil is quite linear, but like you make the exception because it's such a good game.
Yeah.
Same with Final Fantasy up until like the recent ones where they start going free world, open world, but yeah.
Exactly.
But anything else? Anything
No,
we need to say about the podcast?
Yeah, well, like I said, you know what I mean? There's a lot of bullshit going on in the world right now with this new variant, this, that, and the other. And, you know, I don't want to sound too doom and gloom, not necessarily about the mainstream media and their propaganda. I'm not about them, but more so a case of the actual real life implications. I'm working in a gym as a PT, and it's a big gym, and this pandemic's not been kind to it. And, you know, it could well be that I'll be out of the job if things don't go well over the new year, January, February time. And that doesn't bother me because this was always my job as a PT was always plan B. Plan A was to be a creator, to be a writer, to be a producer, to be something where I can be free in my mind. So if people are watching this and you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, because we're going to be doing this this is going to be our career one day. And we're only going to produce more and more content because I'm juggling working full time, being in a relationship, writing this, that, and the other, and doing this. So soon enough, you're going to see more content once we've got the studio, more time on creating content for people to laugh and giggle and learn some shit. So if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button because it's going to help us.
100%. That's the thing as well. We need to do more call to actions, don't we?
Yeah, that's it.
Because do you know what? We're shit at fucking introduce. If we could get serious for a second, like for 30 seconds, and introduce it, you know what I mean?
We will. More so when we're in the.
I know. I mean, yeah. It just all comes with like fucking.
When we're in the studio, yeah. When we're in the studio, like we'll just be like, hit that subscribe button. But yeah, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and because we're only going to keep doing this, and we'll see how.
Here's a question before my battery dies and we stop recording, because like we ain't really got no one lined up for the next couple of weeks, have we? So here's a challenge / 3 people, right? You don't have to name them right now or anything, but in the next couple of days, message me, or you can name them right now if you want. Like 3 people think in the back of your head, like actual people we think we could get. Just think 3 people, you know what I mean? Like you'd want to. I know Vincenzo, Jake. That's Jake. Vincenzo's one of them. We can get him before Christmas, easy.
Yeah, Vincenzo and Vitali.
Jake, love to do Flash Peasants.
Yeah, Flash Peasants. And just anyone we stumble upon, we'll go out there.
That was free right there.
Because of the whole doom and gloom situation around us, it kind of gives me a kick in the ass, because don't forget, like when the podcast was kind of booming during the summer, the whole Delta variant thing was hanging over our heads. Not that I was concerned about the Delta variant, but I was more concerned about how that really gets into people's minds that are on board with the narrative. So it kind of made me distance myself from the job and do the bare minimum of it. So I was focused on getting guests. And I started to get more involved in my PT and my job and all that. And the podcast, I was spending less time getting guests and all that. But now that we're back to this again, it's almost like a blessing in disguise where it's like, fuck plan B. Let's just go for plan A.
Yeah, man. Do you know what? Should we end up with a little story? Should we end it with the story we wrote about last night? Fuck yeah.
Oh yeah. All right, let's do this. So
I'll let you tell us a little treat.
So
all right.
In 2013,
this was I came to visit.
Yeah,
and I nearly never left.
Yeah, you nearly never left, and it was nice. You came down in early 2013 to visit me, and you were there for about 3 weeks. I paid for your ticket, or you paid to get a single ticket down to Weymouth, and I was going to pay for your return ticket, but I just never got around to doing it until eventually it's like, right, you got to go home, Sean. Not saying I wanted you to go home, but you had to go back and sort some affairs out.
Shit out. Yeah.
Because you were always welcome. My mum didn't give a shit. I didn't give a shit. I was happy to have you there.
That room was pretty much set up for me, wasn't it? Like,
yeah. You had to go back and sort some affairs out. But so it was just one particular day that was just insane. It's like you could write a whole film about this day.
Yeah.
And it's February time. It's pretty grim, but we're just getting stoned. And we went to Asda, and I needed to go for a piss. And I thought, I'm going to piss outside Asda. And I'm like, you keep guard. And I'm pissing already. And I'm like, you keep guard. And you just went, keeping guard. And that just fucking made me laugh. My abs tense up. My piss just goes off like a Karsha jet wash. Like, you never heard piss so loud and fucking.
Is this the same day? Alex Ferguson's best friend.
Yeah. So we go into Asda. So we go into Asda, right? And we go into we go into the restaurant upstairs, and we're having breakfast. And this special needs guy comes up to you. You're wearing your Manchester United shirt. And he's something. This is like 7 years ago. This happened, right? So he comes along, and he's like, "Oh, you Manchester United?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm best mates with Alex Ferguson." And at that point, we're just like, "This man's crazy." And
Check,
was like,
please.
yeah, as a joke, I went, check, please. That sort of cliche. But then we made a joke about it last night, saying that wouldn't it be funny that he actually generally was best mates with Alex Ferguson and he just had brain damage, like some horrific accident. There's actually footage out there, or like a photograph of this man with his arm around Alex Ferguson before the accident. And ever since then, he's just been trying to prove to people that he really is Alex Ferguson's best mate. So anyway, we go to this guy's house. I think his name was Ben. He had a real nice house and he had a free house. He invited us over. He said, come on over, we'll smoke some weed. And we're just sat in his living room and this drug dealer shows up. And he's very stoic, very kind of like in drug dealer mode. He's I'll give him credit where he's due. Like he's very professional.
I mean, he kept up the act for a while.
He kept up the act. He was just like very like, you want 2G,
do
do you?
Very
2G?
professional.
Yeah, do you want 2G? Blah, 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 right? And then you and I just chatting amongst ourselves. We roll up a joint, we start smoking, all that. He doesn't leave because he's friends with the guy. And we just started talking about, because bearing in mind, this was 2013, so like 5-6 months before that, George Lucas had sold Star Wars, the IP, to Disney.
Right.
And so you and I were speculating amongst ourselves, like what the future of Star Wars is going to look like. And out of nowhere, the drug dealer just changed his persona and just like ripped the shirt. He's like, fucking Star Wars. And you just see this. He rips open a shirt and it's like a Yoda shirt or like a Star Wars shirt. Like, fucking Star Wars. Fuck yeah.
Like, episode 2 is very criticized, but it's my favorite.
This drug dealer just went from a very stoic to a fucking nerd instantly. It's like we opened up the floodgates on this man's brain. And we just started, he was like, yeah, so I had theories on the blog that, it's going to be individual characters having their own film, like Yoda and Mace Windu. And
wasn't fucking wrong. He was wrong about a lot of things. He wasn't wrong about certain things.
Exactly.
I mean, he did it recently.
Exactly. So that always cracks me up.
You can't predict what people are going to be like, You never know.
That's it.
You never fucking know. It's funny, man.
That's
yeah,
it.
good times. Good times.
Anyway, so we'll wrap this up. I'll be on the Xbox, man, anyway. So
Cool, man.
So yeah, I'll have this.
Subscribe.
Yeah, hit that subscribe button if you're still watching. Really helps because we don't know what the future may hold, and I know what I want to do. I want to fucking make strangers laugh and think, and buy my book when it's out to support me, because you will not be disappointed. It's best I could do. When I sent that manuscript, I was like, that's the best I can do. I'm not saying it's the best thing ever. I would never do that. I'm not that up my own ass, but it's the best I could do. There's nothing more I can change.
All right, well, we'll sell it this way. Well, I'll try to sell it the best way I can, because I have read it. I've read it twice. I've read it twice and skimmed through it today. So from someone who struggles to read, even though he's a writer, fucking once I started reading, can't stop. There you go.
Thank you.
I'm not even dyslexic. I don't know what it is. I think I'm more visual than I am.
You know what it is? I think it's like a muscle. It's like when I don't read for like a week or 2 weeks and I get back into it, my attention takes a little while to. You're on 10%. I'll wrap this up real quickly. I struggle to read 10, 20 pages, and then eventually, before you know it, I'm banging out 50 pages a day, reading wise. It takes a lot to.
It's not even that. It's
concentrate.
If I'm not into it within 5 pages, let's say, then I'm not. What's that? It's like it's obviously not good, or my attention span's not willing to keep up with this novel. You know what I mean? But twice I have with your book, and that's not even saying that as your best mate or co-host. That's saying that as someone who loves to fucking
I appreciate it, mate.
Read and write. Yeah, so there you go. My 2 golden rules are: don't waste the reader's time and don't insult their intelligence. So you'll find that with this book. I'm not going to waste your time, and I ain't going to insult your intelligence. Just enjoy it. You either like it or you don't like it. But if you do like it, fucking enjoy the ride. There you go. Cool.